Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is Friday, so it's Self-Improvement Friday. I'm delighted as always, to have my friend John presenting. And today is one of my favorite topic. I know that John is a big fan of Nietzsche, and this particular idea of Nietzsche is one of his favorite ideas that he keeps talking about again and again and again. So with that, let me hand it over to John.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so as Shrikant mentioned, I do see a lot of new names here. So it can kind of be a paradox to look at self-improvement with eternal recurrence, of course, because it's eternal return of the same thing. We're going to dive into the existential application of this. But usually I structure these presentations, these discussions in terms of like three principles. I like to provide somewhat of a backdrop or context for an idea that we're talking about. So in this case, I actually use the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. If you haven't seen it, it's totally fine. I'm going to summarize the relevant and necessary points in terms of how it pertains to eternal recurrence. Then we're going to dive into the idea itself from Nietzsche and a little bit of Camus. So we're going to get existential. And then we're going to look at the application, what we can kind of learn and apply from this concept.
John, let me add one more thing because there are a few new people. Let me add one more thing. Let me tell you about the entire format. So what John is describing is the presentation, after which we are going to go to Q&A. And you get to ask any question that you have. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to divide into groups, small groups of about 6 to 8 people, so we can discuss this idea really thoroughly, back and forth, for about 25 minutes. And then we come back into this room automatically, and we talk about our takeaways. And then I and John will be hearing all the takeaways, and we'll try to identify themes that repeat for many, many people. And we'll pick a few themes, and we're going to be talking about that. So that's the plan. Over to you, John.
Cool, awesome. So the first, I guess, part of this, we can look at the summarization of eternal recurrence if you haven't seen it. So it is a movie, I think it's like the early 2000s or something, and it's centered on a relationship and a dynamic between two individuals. One is Joel, played by Jim Carrey. The other one is Clementine by Kate Winslet. And they're pretty much polar opposites. Clementine is very eccentric, very outgoing, very extroverted, very spontaneous. And Joel is kind of, I think he's like a painter or a writer. He's very pensive, very quiet, very shy, reserved, introverted kind of type. And the whole movie centers around the relationship. So they meet in this they meet in a train cab on the way to Montauk in New York, or Long Island, New York, and their relationship kind of just like they have instant chemistry. They start to blossom, they start to flourish, they start to explore, going on dates and everything like that. They have a lot of chemistry, but one day, I think it's about a year later, it transitions into the future. So they've known each other for about a year. Joel bought her a Valentine's Day gift. So this is about 1 year after they met, because they met the day before Valentine's Day. So we assume it's exactly 1 year later. He goes to buy her a gift, and he arrives at her job, and he's going to surprise her with this gift. But she literally treats him like a stranger. She says, "Sir, can I help you?" Which is very off-putting to him. And she literally doesn't know who he is. She doesn't recognize him. We later learn this story is hinged upon a service that is available to people in this society, provided by a company called Lacuna. And what Lacuna does is it gives you the opportunity to literally erase somebody from your memory. If you had a bad, toxic relationship with an ex-lover, if you had somebody, depart from your life, if somebody passed away, you have the option to turn in all your mementos, all of your objects that you think of that person, and they do some sort of a brain scan and you forget all of your memories. So we later conclude that Clementine did that to Joel. So she erased the memories, and he's like, he's heartbroken. So he doesn't know why. So the story follows him trying to figure out why, where things went wrong. Why would she do that to him with no explanation? He verifies that she erased him from his memory from a letter that he gets from his parents because he's going crazy. And the parents are like, "Look, this is what happened. We're sorry to tell you, but this is how she felt. Whatever happened. We suggest you move on." So he tries to move on, and he eventually decides, okay, I want to do this procedure too. This is just tearing at me. I can't live with this. So he decides to have Clementine erased from his memories. And the story follows that, but then eventually he begins to regret his decision. So it follows him in his consciousness playing back through his memories, and he's trying, it's going recessive and deductive in his memories down back to the very first memory that they have together, Joel and Clementine. And eventually he decides that, again, like I said, he didn't want to do that. He regretted it. And it kind of ends and summarizes in a state of, after he's done this memory erasing, they meet again. So we learn that their relationship is literally cyclical. So they are stuck in this repetitive loop of erasing each other's memory, meeting each other again, erasing each other's memory, or meeting again. So it's literally, it's the exact same events. And then the story twists in the end because they get cognizant and they get conscious knowledge of the fact that they are about to enter this cycle again. Because one of the staff members of Lacuna actually releases all of these tapes to all of their clients for whatever reason. And they receive these tapes. So Joel and Clementine are early on in their relationship, like a week in, and then they get these tapes that are kind of, it's weird because it's from the past, but it's about the future, if you know what I mean by that. And it's describing why they erase each other's memories of each other. So we hear Clementine put the tape in the radio while they're in the car together, and Clementine is saying, oh, I hate him, he's so boring, I feel trapped, I despise him, he's so this, he's so that. And he's really confused. And then Joel goes home and sees a tape of himself, of his former self, erasing the memory of Clementine. Oh, I hate her. She's so impulsive. She's this. She loves attention. She has a wandering eye, whatever he doesn't like about her. And then the beautiful, in my opinion, the most beautiful part of the entire movie is in the end, where they both know what they're getting into. They both know this relationship is going to be toxic. It's going to not end well. It's not going to be, harmonious. And eventually because they're listening to the tapes of like what they're going to eventually hate about each other in 1 year's time, right? So they see what's going to happen. They have precognition. They have knowledge of the future. And what they do is they literally laugh this off and they say, okay, whatever, let's do it anyway. Right? So they know it's bound to fail, but they still embrace this absurdity. They embrace this relationship, even though they know they're eventually going to hate each other and despise each other and want to erase each other from their memory and break up or whatever in particular happens. So that's the beautiful twist in the end. And I think it honestly made me think of the quote from Kierkegaard, where he says, once I opened my eyes to reality, I laughed and I have not stopped laughing since. And that's how literally the movie ends. They embrace their absurd future with laughter. And I think it's such a beautiful encapsulation of the principles that we're going to talk about, such a beautiful encapsulation of, embracing all of life's ups and downs. And yeah, so I think it's a really good context to dive into what we're going to talk about today, and that is eternal recurrence. So this is a theory espoused by Nietzsche in his book, The Gay Science. It's one of his later works. And I'm going to read the little paragraph now, and we're going to dive into some implications and some other symbolism here. So Nietzsche actually doesn't provide any necessarily like back text to this. Nietzsche's style, this is like an essay, like aphoristic style. So it's literally just like a section, and then he's like, okay, here's eternal recurrence. It's not embedded in a story. He doesn't really give any other philosophical, substantiation to it, but he just lays it out right here. So eternal recurrence in Nietzsche's words. He says, the greatest stress. How, if some day or night, a demon were to sneak after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it. Every pain, every joy, every thought, every sigh, everything immeasurably small or great in your life must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider and this moonlight between the trees and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned over and over, and you with it, a grain of dust. And here's the distinction here. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke to you? Or did you once experience a tremendous amount where you would have answered a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you were a god and never have I heard anything more godly? If this thought were to gain possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and every thing, do you want this once more and innumerable times more, would weigh upon your actions as the greatest stress. Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal? So that's very interesting that he posits a dichotomy in terms of your response to this promulgation of eternal recurrence as a theory. You would either be crushed by it, or you would be enlightened and invigorated by this. You would say, this is divine or this is hellish. I want nothing to do with it. So for a little bit more instantiation, I want to read on his definition of amor fati, which is love of fate. He kind of gives us a little bit more context to this. It's very short, so it's only a sentence or two. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, which means love your fate. That one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely to bear what is necessary or conceal it, but to love it. So to love whatever is necessary, embrace every single moment. You do not wish you would have any other past or any other future than you are going to become and that you're going to lead up into. And I want to talk about a particularly important part in the end of the first section on eternal recurrence, where he says, how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than eternal recurrence? So how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and life? What does that mean? I think in part, my interpretation of that can be that you have to inherently know yourself, know what you like, know what you don't like. You have to have had so many life experiences so that you can articulate to yourself your own hierarchy of values. So for example, going back to eternal recurrence for a second, we can look at this in a kind of vague way that Joel and Clementine had their hierarchy of values in order to embrace eternal recurrence. Okay, and what I mean by that is if they looked at their emotional highs, they looked at their moments of triumph, moments of connection, moments of love and embracing each other and compassion as more important than the inevitable downfall. So that's a hierarchy of values. Okay, not one moment is, I guess, stale. It's not all the same. These are all intertwined into one another, but you can still value these things subjectively in terms of your own will, in terms of how well you are dispositioned to yourself and to life. So that makes me think of the value structure that you have to have by yourself. You have to establish this yourself. And I think this is most effectively and efficiently established through a myriad of discursive life experiences of, as Nietzsche would say, the holy yes, embracing life in terms of your expression of your will and overcoming things so you can eventually surmount things. And another idea that is tangentially and adjacently related to this is, of course, in the myth of Sisyphus with the embrace of absurdity. And if we all don't know, the Greek legend of Sisyphus, very brief, I'm not going to talk about his life, but his punishment, we all know, was eternally rolling up a boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, and he was stuck in this loop perpetually and eternally. And then obviously existentialist philosophers and absurdist philosophers like Camus kind of looked at symbolism to the human lifespan as equivalent to Sisyphus. So he has a passage in here where he says it is during that return, during the descent of the boulder down the mountain, where he says, at each of those moments when he leaves the heights and gradually sinks toward the lairs of the gods, he is superior to his fate. He is stronger than his rock. So I would look at this combined with eternal recurrence as, in terms of my life, like when I first came across this idea of eternal recurrence in Nietzsche's book, The Gay Science, I actually, it shook me to my core. And then the more I thought about it, the more I personally concluded that I would embrace this idea, for the only fact that I look at it as a very practical sense of, even though every life is filled with, pain, betrayal, heartbreak, suffering, loss, death, disease, decay, anything you name it. You can say suffering, you can say this is the basic fundamental existential problem. Even though it's full, generously littered with these things, we can still choose to embrace these things and sublimate and transmute them into their physical and into their positive and constructive counterpart, right? So we can find the good in the bad. One of my favorite quotes, I know Shrikant knows, is Carl Jung, in the filth it will be found. Right? So through this suffering, through this eternal journey of all of this embracing this negative attributes of life, you can surmount to these higher mountains. An idea from, I think this is Beyond Good and Evil from Nietzsche. He says, there are heights of the soul from which tragedy seems to look or fails to look tragic. There are heights from the soul when tragedy ceases to appear tragic. It doesn't work its tragic effect anymore. Another idea, he says, is strideth over all mountains and laugheth at all tragedies. That's in Zarathustra. So it's like you can look at your highs and lows, and you can compensate for all of your lows by surmounting them, by finding the physical, the beneficial equivalent in them, and then surmounting them. And that peak, that peak of the mountaintop along this hike, along with Sisyphus, when he gets to that peak, that is sufficient compensation for all of the toil, all of the suffering, all of the sacrifice that preceded it, right? And you have these, you always have this option in front of you. So moving into I guess a pragmatic application of an idea for this, personally, I try to live my life with this philosophy of trying to sublimate and transmute all of my lows and defeats and failures and losses into gains, into their positive counterpart. So I call it I literally call it an alchemy journal. So anytime I have a detrimental, a negative experience in my life, a loss, a failure, I come up against opposition or challenges, I feel overwhelmed, I feel heartbroken, whatever it is, I write down what I'm experiencing in this moment. Okay, I just try to objectively capture it. And then it might take a week, it might take a month, it might take me, several years even. I have some that are unfulfilled yet. But I try to find, I ask myself, okay, what is the positive counterpart of this? What is the gem in this? What can I find in this filth, as Carl Jung would say? What is the benefit that this happened to me? If you look at this, it's like, okay, this is very detrimental objectively, but I can say, if I approach it with, this is a blessing, let me figure out why, that's going to it's going to condition my subconscious mind to always look for the positive in things. And I think an attitude like that for me is at least why I can entertain the idea of eternal recurrence, and why I can, try as best as I can to use Nietzsche's words to want this once more and innumerable times more. So I tried to look at myself as having and like I said, an alchemy journal, in terms of looking at all of my detrimental experiences and looking for the counterpart, and then eventually working through them, putting these things into my journal, putting these things into pragmatic, applications and disciplines and tasks and goals, and then extracting those. And I would say, yes, I would utter, as Nietzsche says, the holy yes to this. I would want that innumerable times more, because I've had the correct conditioning and a constructive philosophy and attitude toward this. So I can embrace everything that I've overcome in my life, because this moment that I'm alive right now makes all of my past suffering, all of my past, obstacles, challenges worth it. Okay. Because the fact that we are even alive right now shows us that we have overcome everything that has been in our path so far. Okay, you've survived 100% of all your bad days. You survived 100% of your heartbreaks, of your betrayals, of your sufferings, of every time you were overwhelmed. You survived all of that. So you've surmounted all of that because you are here. Your very act of existence is a rebellion toward these detrimental states. So you can look at this with a holy yes, and you can embrace this. And again, to use Nietzsche's words, want this innumerable times more. So I want to also talk about two more points in terms of an application. So embracing everything that is in life and embracing everything that is necessary. That makes me, I want to drill on the point that we can look at a goal. We can have a goal. We can have some sort of an ideal established for ourselves, which Nietzsche also says in, believe it's Beyond Good and Evil. A great man is merely the play actor of his own ideal. So you should establish your own ideal. And that's literally the entire philosophy of Zarathustra, is your own ideal. Once you have your own ideal, you are to embrace whatever is necessary. And we know that an ideal, by definition, it is beyond you, okay? It is beyond your current circumstances. We create out of dissatisfaction. So dissatisfaction is a creative state. It means I'm not satisfied with my current circumstances. Therefore, I'm going to extend 1 foot beyond myself, as Zarathustra would say, and then establish an ideal, establish a goal, establish a reality that is worthy of me. And guess what? Even though it's worthy of me, I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to inevitably and ineluctably come across obstacles, challenges. I'm going to come across, these external tools and canvases that are going to force me to grow, that are going to force me to introduce myself to myself. So adversity introduces a man to himself. So you look at this journey, you look at this uphill climb of Sisyphus, the rock and the mountain are not a rock and a mountain. They're merely just mirrors reflecting Sisyphus's nature back to himself. So I look at that as a practical way of embracing whatever is necessary between you and your goal. So your goal is by definition, again, on this summit, on this zenith of the mountain. And you have to embrace whatever is between you and that individual. So the last and final point that I want to talk about is something that can help me ground this philosophy into my daily actions. So asking yourself, do I want this once more and innumerable times more? That means I'm going to tend to make the correct decision given my options, given my circumstances, given my sets and paths and potentialities laid out in front of me. Because if I'm destined to repeat this decision again, I'm going to want to make the right one, right? So in order to do this, it's predicated on a lot of self-awareness. It's predicated on a lot of observation. And the number one way I've been able to cultivate observation and self-awareness is a consistent practice of meditation. So there's several modalities, there's several methodologies, there's several philosophies behind meditation itself. But I think the core fundamental, I guess, tenet of it is being aware of the conversation that you have with yourself in your own mind. So we tend to mindlessly react to this emotional chatter that is in our mind. We tend to react and be intermediary devices for other people, for other external stimuli, which we know from the Stoic philosophy have absolutely no power than the power that we choose to submit to it, right? And then we choose to give it and extend to it. So when we have a consistent practice of meditation, for me at least, I have noticed the most profound effect is a distancing, I would say, between like external event and internal response. So it's not a reaction to the world. I try not to have reactions to the world. I try to have responses to the world. So if something happens outside of me, I could say, okay, what's the most effective way for me to act right now? What is the most intelligent thing that I can do right now? I try to not get caught up in the immediate emotional reactions. And I have more awareness of like, okay, here's this reaction and I can entertain it for a little bit. Aristotle has the famous quote, "Is a mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." So you don't have to accept everything that is into your external world. You don't have to accept and go along with these influences that can govern your behavior and your decisions. And again, we should always be wise and aware of our behavior and our decisions, because if we're entertaining this idea of eternal recurrence, we are doomed. I don't want to say doomed, but we are, anchored to repeat it over and over and over. So if we are anchored to repeat it over and over and over, if we entertain Nietzsche's philosophy of eternal recurrence, we want to have a proclivity to make the correct decision. And for me, like I said, meditation has greatly, given me that self-awareness in moments where I can stop and pause and ask myself, I think as he says, the greatest stress, do I want this once more? And do I want this infinite times more? So with that said, we are now going to transition into the second part of the discussion. I'm going to pass it over to Shrikant for moderation of Q&A.
Thanks, John. Great as usual. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then I'll open it up for questions. Folks, you can line up for asking questions by typing ! in the chat or raising your hand in Zoom. So John, I've been thinking about this today, this concept, and most of the times people think of this in terms of values, in terms of saying that it is worth pursuing your highest values, even if it means you have to go through pain, because it is all worth it. So it is from the value perspective. But I was thinking about it from the virtue perspective. And from virtue perspective, actually, this is a very powerful principle, because everything about virtue, what you should do, is all about coming up with a principled way of acting. And a principled way of acting is something that you can do again and again and again and again. So things like, dichotomy of control, always separate between what is yours and what is not yours, what is within your control, what is within your power, which is not. That's a principle you can apply again and again and again and again, every second of the day, and it will produce good results. So for example, all the universal principles, like for example, for me, form follows function. More I apply it, another way of putting it, you know, in one of your favorite ways, it's like Fibonacci sequence, right? You're saying that you're going from, you have these two items, you add them up and you produce something, which is a multiplication. And then you keep on adding, and that's all you're doing. So it's like an eternal recurrence. So you work very hard to find principles like that, which are scalable. So I'm thinking of it in terms of kind of growth. You know, you focus on identifying principal way of operating, which is scalable, which you can do all the time. And then you just do that, because that's what, you know, that's what virtue ethics is. That is what Fibonacci sequence is. That is what universal principles are. So all of them are like versions of implementing this principle in virtue ethics, or in how you do things. What do you think?
I completely second that point, and it makes me think of something that we had a discussion on a few weeks ago. I don't remember exactly what discussion, what presentation, but I was talking about like identification with attributes versus identifications with roles, and it's exactly what you just said. Like once you have that, it's repeatable. All you have to do is stay consistent to that principle, right? You have this underlying framework of like a universal law or this virtue ethics or whatever you're going to operate by. You have that. Okay, that is perpetual, that is perennial, that is always in operation. All you do with your individual like conscious faculty is choose to adhere to that. Okay, just the fundamental Stoic mantra, live consistently with nature. You can look at that in a literal way with Fibonacci, of course. Live consistently with continual evolution and adaptation and expansion and integration, right? So to circle back to the first point, identification with roles versus identification with attributes, for anybody who wasn't in that discussion, if I identify with a role, I can say I'm a carpenter. Okay, that's what I do. I build houses. Whereas if I identify with attributes, I can say I love protecting people. I love sheltering people. I love providing people a sense of security. Okay, that is transferable. Okay, I can do that for the rest of my life. Even when I am stripped of the physical ability to build a house, I can still provide that value of security. So that's me, being consistent and adhering to that principle of identifying with a attribute or a philosophy. Whereas form, that would be temporary. If I say I'm a construction worker, I'm a this, I'm that, that's very temporary. That's transitory. It's not, it's not a repeatable decision you make. You know what I mean? It's a small window of time. Whereas if I look at principles, if I look at my life in principles and I write those down, I can be consistent with that from when I have my conscious inductive reasoning faculty developed at age 7 until the day I lose my consciousness, right? So I completely agree with that.
Excellent. I want to make one other point. I'm a very curious person. So for me, kind of relentlessly learning new things is critical to my being. So there is an issue of kind of variety, wanting a variety of things. So that's on one hand. The second part of it is this consistency of doing something which is the same. So the great thing about something which is a universal principle is that in a very simple method, you are able to achieve almost unlimited amount of growth and unlimited amount of expression. So if you choose those principles, like Louis Sullivan says, I care only about principles or ideas that are universal, or that can be converted into a universal idea. So which allows for this unlimited expression. So I think that if done right, it satisfies the kind of the sameness and kind of eternal recurrence and enormous variety at the same time. Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what you're talking about with but I love a philosophy in the sense that it's universal. I completely agree with that. I mean, part of my whole journey into psychology, and I mean, even like my taste in literature now, I mean, it's been a process of exactly that, of deduction into principles. I started with, as you know, self-help and business books and personal development books, and then it graduated into philosophy or psychology, and then eventually philosophy, and then I got into the classics. And it's very rare that I read anything past like 1900 now, just because I'm trying to find the universal principles and I'm trying to get as close to firsthand, information as I can, and then extract my own value. So I want to be consistent with those, principles, those universal laws. So I absolutely agree with that point, 100%.
Wonderful. Thank you. So now let's open it up for questions. So we got 4 rules. Number 1, type exclamation mark when you want to speak. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. It's going to be Jean, David, Aaron, and Laura next. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I have a hard time first to thinking about anything recurring. Then I actually think one thing is really down to me is the death. Like the death will occur in everybody's life. So, but we still live anyway. We all know our ending. We will all be dead. But we live like it's not going to be there anyway. So we live the fullest. I think that's actually very similar to the story, Sunshine of the Band. Actually, this is one of my favorite movie. Another one is Being John Malkovich. It's just mind-blowing. I really love this type of movies. So I think death is really like, we all know we are dying, If we are religious, maybe you get another cycle of opportunity to live again. But it's very similar to that kind of replaying of the. Another thing I'm thinking is, I remember I read a book called Sex Being Such a Pain. It actually say like we always encounter same type of difficult person. Like they actually come to our life to teach us a lesson. So if we don't learn the lesson, they will keep coming back. Like you will have the same type of abusive boyfriend or same type of bully boss until you learn how to deal with it. So I think it's fascinating, like the recurring theme is actually teach us to grow. It's actually reminded me about unpleasant meeting I had yesterday. I actually keep asking myself, why I'm so upset. It's not attacking myself, but I'm the one who really get upset. Then I actually ordered the book Stoicism. I said, maybe I need to work on myself, not be easily upset. So it's something I need to grow. This person may be sent to me to teach me.
Jean, what's your question?
My question is that this is my understanding. I'm trying to see if that aligns with what John is talking about.
Okay, thanks.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting insight. I haven't looked at that personally in terms of like condensing eternal recurrence down to themes in terms of like the microcosm, but you're absolutely right in that. Like patterns will persist until you learn the necessary lesson or you develop the required skills or competence in order to surmount that, or else it's going to keep resurfacing. And I think relationship is a very good example. So yeah, I do agree with that. Absolutely. So thank you.
Next up is David.
I guess Fridays are what? Self-improvement Friday? Is that the name of the general?
Yes.
Yeah, see, I believe the myth of Sisyphus and also Nietzsche's The Eternal Recurrence is kind of being twisted by this idea of self-improvement. Sisyphus was experiencing a lousy existence, and it wasn't the message that you can overcome it, except for the fact that the gods were punishing him. That was the whole point of the thing. And so he could endure it and sort of scorn the gods and just deal with his fate, accept his fate. But he wasn't able to overcome the pain and the suffering and the pushing of the rock. It was sweat every time. It was terrible every time. The idea wasn't that he overcame it in any sort of sense that way. The idea was that he accepted it, and in acceptance, rather than trying to grow or whatever else that you're suggesting, John, he just said, okay, this is me, this is my fate. We're talking about fate. And the fact that I accept it, I accept myself being this way, and I have to push this darn rock. And the fact that I accept it rather than try to change and get out of it or something is the kind of overcoming of that fate, if you like, or not even really overcoming it, just the fact that you accept it, you're sort of giving the finger to the gods who make you have to do it. But you still don't it's not like it's a great life. I mean, he was suffering every time, but he just kind of accepted it. And I guess it's a sort of a compromise or a compensation for the suffering, the fact that he can accept it. I think that was more the message than, and similarly with eternal recurrence, Nietzsche, I'm not sure that he was into, okay, we can overcome this. Eternal recurrence suggests that you never overcome anything. You're back to square one every time. You're not like one time you're at level 1 and then through hard work, the next time you come back, you're at level 2. No, you start right again at level 1. There's no growth involved. The idea is the acceptance thing, the fact that this is your life. It's going to be your life every time. And Nietzsche kind of says, if you knew that, would you want to go on? But he doesn't say you have a choice. In fact, eternal recurrence suggests there is no free will. There is no choice. I came to the conclusion of eternal recurrence through physics, merely by the fact that if it's a quantum physics, there's not enough. Sure. Eventually, okay, I'm just going to get right to the end. So there's the configuration space is limited and you have to repeat. So that's my take on the thing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I definitely do look at things in terms of, as you brought up, it's self-improvement Fridays. I've been conditioning my mind for several years to always extract principles. It's one of my fundamental, I guess, axioms that I try to live by is all knowledge is useless unless it's implemented. If I can't implement it, I'm not interested in it. In my personal opinion, for most part. So when I read works like philosophy, when I read works like existentialism, I'm not so much concerned in the, maybe the cultural veracity of implications of particular things. But if you read, Camus' Myth of Sisyphus, for example, I mean, yes, you're right, is the actual myth. Like if you look at Sisyphus's life in terms of like the Greek tragedy, I'm not saying, deny this fate. I'm not saying he's looking for growth. I'm saying in terms of accepting this journey, in terms of accepting this, maybe it's redundant to do this, in terms of accepting that he's reached more heights within the confines of that lifetime. Same with Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, okay? Eternal recurrence. Even though I have to repeat my life over and over, if I start at square one on my life as a teenager, as this, I don't know, for lack of a better term, useless, incompetent, timid person, and I've grown so much in terms of personal development, I would want to do that over and over because of that journey, because of that surmounting, because that moment when I'm, 30, 40, 50, and I'm reflecting on my life, I can say, wow, look at how much I've grown. I love this. I would embrace this. I don't care if it repeats eternally. So that's like the personal development aspect superimposed onto a, philosophical treatise of these ideas.
Next up is Aaron, Laura, and Joe.
Yeah, great presentation, John, and really well said. I like that. Every time I think of eternal recurrence, I also think of the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, which is about a guy who's forced to live the same day over and over and over for 10 years. And I think that the lesson that we get from this is making the best with banality. Like your life is really boring. Like you're riding the subway, you go to work and you see the same people, but like, what could you be doing every single day to make that subway ride awesome? What could you be doing every single day to make the people in your office laugh? What new talents could you be cultivating? And like the more, even if you're living in a very boring lifestyle, there's always some level of agency and there's always something more you could be doing to make that banality and make that life worth living. And for those of you who haven't checked out the film, check it out. It's a classic.
All right, John, you want to add anything?
No, I exactly agree. I mean, yes, okay. It's banal, but I mean, as Nietzsche said, the greatest stress is asking yourself in every moment, do I want this once more? If you had a miserable ride in this train, probably not. So what can you do to make that not a miserable ride or a banal ride or, monotonous or mundane daily existence? You know what I mean? If you're going to have it innumerable times more, you're going to automatically capitalize on it if you're aware.
Yeah, and I think Groundhog Day is a perfect movie to illustrate this as well.
I haven't seen that.
I would recommend that for just for that, because I think it just focuses exactly squarely on this particular point of eternal recurrence and what you can do with it. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Joe. Laura, go ahead.
Are you familiar with topology in mathematics? The topic of topology?
I am not.
Yeah, it will be too far. You have to talk about
Okay,
something.
but it's a perfect topic. It's
Go ahead.
about the invariance of domain, that when you start with something, you can take that thing and you can mold it into other things, but you still have the same element. You haven't broken it. And so it's effectively, you're still the same, but you're different. And you can take that and mold it. There's a wonderful example of it in the Albert and Victoria Museum in England, where there's a picture of a donut, and it's morphed. They manipulate it into a teacup, and it's the same consistency. The material's the same. It was a donut, but now it's a teacup, and that teacup can then become a model car or whatever. But it'll still be it's still the X value is still the same. Anyway, I think it fits very well into what you're talking about, if you want to continue using mathematical discussion. Anyway, but the other thing, I think you're giving people too much credit for thinking about things, honestly. You know, I think the person with the boring ride doesn't really think much about, you know, the kinds of things you would give them credit for thinking about. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
So one thing I would say, I want to add about the math. I think that's actually a very good point. I mean, there is a lot of things in mathematics, like, you know, kind of invariant transformations. You know, what is it that remains same when you're doing this entire series of transformations? So it's a very interesting idea. So it's kind of like a turbocharged version of the Fibonacci sequence, but in geometry. So that's really fascinating. All right, next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, John, and thank you for the presentation this evening again. One of the things that I had thought about when reading about the film, I had not seen it, but when I read about it, was the idea of pain and how it actually sends a signal to us that we need to change something, and that it ultimately we become our ideal self, and we learn to accept ourselves in this process. However, I was wondering if there is a scale to that pain. So say you're a soldier with PTSD or something that has seen and encountered something horrible, where you're not going to necessarily relive that particular moment ever again. Would that then be a case where you would want to get rid of the memory and not endure the pain and actually have to overcome, because it can actually stop you from becoming in a way?
That's a very philosophical question, because it's pretty. So if we look at in terms of the movie, like they had a sort of scale of pain, but obviously these were so trivial compared to anything experienced in the battlefield, right? So they had just like these. They actually provided shots in it in the movie. If you have time, I would recommend it. I actually really like the movie. But they provided shots in it, like a very mundane date, they were getting food, and they were just like, they were just silent, just like complaining about like, oh, you should clean the house. Or like, it was just so bland, and they did a very good job at that. And that was like their version of pain. It was like mundane existence. Joel was in his house, and his wife or girlfriend, whatever, gets home at like 3 a.m. and she's been out drinking, and he's just like upset with that. And that was their version of pain. So that's very trivial, right? Compared to anything in the battlefield. But in terms of a hierarchy, in terms of a structure, if maybe that soldier can apply it to an end, if he couldn't apply it to an end, I would say, yeah, I would dispense with that. You know what I mean? Personally, like, because if it's inhibiting you, if it's governing you from your full expression of something, or you're having flashbacks, or it was meaningless suffering, as Nietzsche would say, which is the doorway to nihilism, suicidal nihilism, meaningless suffering. If it wasn't applied to an end, or it wasn't justified, or it wasn't capitalized on, or it wasn't transmuted into a positive counterpart, personally, I would say dispense with it, because there's not really a lesson in that. You know what I mean? If it's something that's so, I don't know, traumatizing or so heartbreaking, there's no really lesson in it, I would personally say dispense with that. Like, that's too high over it's going to tip the scales. Like, there's nothing positive that that soldier could have encountered, whether it was, you know, reconciling with his family after the war, you know, seeing his friend after war get married, whatever it happened to be, like whatever his triumph was from that battle, it wouldn't weigh against that traumatic experience. So I would say dispense with it, because it's a fruitless effort at that point.
Right, folks, what we're going to do now is we're going to do breakout rooms, but I'm introducing one more feature in the breakout rooms. I'm going to be always in the main room. I'm always in the main room. So if the breakout room is not working for you, you can just leave the breakout room, and you just click on leave the breakout room, and you'll end up, and I'll be happy to talk to you. All right, so that offers a, you know, that alternative if the breakout room is not working for you. You know, try to make it work for you, but if you can't, you always have an option. All right, I'm starting the breakout rooms now.
The questions.
Oh,
No?
sorry. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, so for anybody who's new, I provide 3 questions for the breakout rooms just to facilitate discussion. If you guys run out of things to talk about, we usually primarily talk about these points though. So the first question is, does eternal return sound undesirable to you? What are some arguments against it? Like, would you not want to experience eternal recurrence? Would you not want to have this moment innumerable times more? Would you not want to have eternal return? What are some arguments against it? Second question is a polarization of that. Is eternal return favorable to you? What are some arguments for it? And the third question is it practical to live with what Nietzsche calls the greatest stress weighing over every one of your decisions? And that is the seal of eternal return. Is it practical to live a lifestyle with that always in mind, that I'm going to live this life forever and ever and ever, over and over and over? Nothing's going to change forever. Is it practical to live that way? So those are 3 questions. Arguments against it, arguments for it. Is it practical?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, John.